Hey, this is JJ Virgin. Welcome and thanks so much for joining me. This is Ask the Health Expert. Here I put the power of health in your hands and give you access to the top people in health and wellness. In each episode, I share safe ways to get healthy, lose weight, heal your gut, detox, and lots more. So if you want to get healthy and get off the dieting for life merry-go-round, I'll give you strategies that will help you look and feel better fast. Hey, it's JJ here. So this is super cool. We have had my buddy Dr. Fiona McCulloch on before, and I love reading her blog. And we will put the resources, her blog and all that stuff in the show notes at jjvirgin.com/Dr. Fiona Clock, DrFiona Clock, CLOCK. You'll find out why in a minute. Anyway, I was reading this blog she wrote about fat cells and their circadian rhythm. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I need you on the show talking about this. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, that fat cells, your fat cells actually have a circadian rhythm. And when you know what that is, it will help you make the right decisions about when to eat, because I'm kind of obsessed with not just what to eat, but also when to eat, because it makes a big difference. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Fiona. She's a naturopathic doctor. She's the founder of White Lotus Integrative Medicine Clinic in Toronto, Canada. She's been serving thousands of women with hormonal issues since 2001 and is an expert in PCOS. She wrote the book 8 Steps to Reverse Your PCOS. She's also the medical advisor and has developed a nutrition methodology for the open source Health PCOS project. And she has an amazing gift for all of you today as well. Again, you'll be able to get all this at jjvirgin.com/Dr. Fiona Clock. And now you know why I put clock in there. She's going to give you a great resource on insulin demand. So you're going to be able to grab that too. Now, before we dive into the show, I want to do a shout out to Vicky Platt, who left us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Says, I've listened to several podcasts while getting a fall garden bed ready for plants, listened about skin and sex, the brain, sleep, and more. Learned so much. Thank you, JJ Virgin, for having such informative guests on so many topics. All right, make sure that you are subscribing at Subscribe to JJ so that you can get all this awesome stuff. Of course, while you're there, I'd love to have a review from you so I can shout you out now. So if you've got something you'd love to know more about, let us know so we can go out and either seek the best expert in it or I will do my solo on it. And same with questions and answers. All right, now before we dive in today, I want to share another fave with you. Here it is.
I wrote a little song to remind you, Choice Hotels get you more of the experiences you value. The Cambria Hotel's got it all. A rooftop bar, have a ball. Cocktails up here feel just right. Is Cambria amazing? All right. Bring a date, your team, or even your mom. Book direct at choicehotels.com. See you on the roof.
Hey, super excited to have you on the show, Dr. Fiona McCulloch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, JJ.
Well, it's been a while. I read this article and then I bombarded you because it was so fascinating. So, I mean, I am really thrilled to be diving into this whole idea about circadian rhythm and how that fat cells have a circadian rhythm. Oh my gosh. Like so awesome. So let's kind of take it back from the beginning and talk about what the heck is circadian rhythm anyway and why does it matter?
Absolutely. Yeah, when I found this study, I was just like mind blown. I was just amazed with it. So, the circadian rhythm is really a rhythm of time, with the body, and typically it's thought of as a 24-hour period. And so it's the way that things happen at certain times in the body. So, for example, we all know that cortisol, the stress hormone, has a circadian rhythm where it's released primarily in the morning, and then the levels decline throughout the rest of the day. And many other things in our bodies run on a circadian rhythm too.
So, like, first of all, this like, I'd never thought I've always thought about circadian rhythm and how it impacted health and weight in terms of, like, I remember the first time I looked at it, it was I had a client early on. This was probably 30 years ago, so 25 years ago, and she was a nurse who did the graveyard shift. And she said to me, she goes, my friends have told me that I can't lose weight because I do the graveyard shift. Well, I didn't know anything about this, Fiona. So I said, oh, that's ridiculous. Of course you can. That wouldn't impact it. Now, she lost 100 pounds. And I kind of at the time thought, well, maybe it was better I didn't know what I didn't know. But I now know that that could have a huge impact on it. So let's talk about, like, how does circadian rhythm affect weight loss and why? What's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a lot of research into this in the past maybe 10 years. And what we've been finding, time and time again in different studies is that really, if your sleep is disrupted or if you happen to work shift work like this nurse who was your client, there is definitely weight gain associated with that. There's more insulin resistance, which causes us to gain weight. And it's been, sort of known that when people start shifting their hours, when they start traveling to different time zones, they actually can easily gain weight. And in particular, more around the midsection, because it does influence our levels of insulin in the body, which causes to gain weight around that area.
So you talked about that and gaining weight, but we're really talking about gaining fat. So let's kind of dig into fat and what it really is, because it's not. I remember like years ago, it was like fat's just like this bad backpack you're carrying around. It's like, well, no, not really.
Yeah, yeah. You sort of remember that wheelbarrow from Oprah where she
Yeah.
brought that
Uh
out? Yeah. Just like a big,
huh.
mound of
Yeah,
fat.
it's just a blob of stuff.
Yeah. And like what they've been finding is that's not true at all. So fat is actually an endocrine organ. So it actually makes hormones. It does lots of things. It tells our brain how much energy we have stored. So it's a very active, hormonal system, our fat. It's not just, a storage unit that's just, pumped with energy and we just burn it. It actually does a lot of communicating with our body. And it's actually really important for our metabolic health, how our fat cells are actually functioning.
So then how does this relate to like fat cells, circadian rhythm? How does this all play together?
Yeah, so this study was really interesting. And what they did was they actually took some people who had a fairly normal circadian rhythm to start with. And then they actually started to put them into a routine where they were eating at the same time, they were sleeping at the same time. And they did that for 10 days to kind of get them all matched up and on the same kind of clock. Then what they did was they took away that routine. They took away daylight, temperature, and they put food into a very standardized window, which was evenly distributed throughout the day. And then they just looked at the actual time and they looked at what the people's fat cells were doing. They started measuring the fat cells every 6 hours. So they actually biopsied the fat cells and measured what their genes were doing inside. And what they found was that the fat cells, just based on time, so not based on, how long ago you've eaten, not based on when you've been sleeping, but just simply based on the time, your fat cells do profoundly different things. So there was a huge difference between what the fat cells were doing, for example, in the morning and at nighttime.
So what were they doing? What were they doing in the morning
Yeah.
versus nighttime?
So it's so interesting because in the morning, the fat cells actually did a lot of different things that were sort of similar to manufacturing. So they were involved in, making hormones, making cytokines that send signals to the rest of the body, making, a variety of different adipokines, which are different little hormones that our fat cells signal to tell our body to do different things. And then at nighttime, what they found was that the fat cells were in a completely different state. So what they were doing was performing antioxidant actions and breaking things down. So they were breaking down, fat itself. So that's called lipolysis. So they do that more at nighttime. And they were breaking down organic acids, which are byproducts of different metabolic processes in the body. So they were in completely different states in the day and in the nighttime.
Well, so knowing that then, because something I've been so fascinated with is, and I've watched this whole progression, Fiona, from, 25 years ago, where you were supposed to have breakfast, a snack, lunch, a snack, dinner, and then, oh my gosh, you better have a snack after dinner too.
Yep.
It's like, oh, really? You know,
Lots of snacking.
from that to going, all right, well, let's not snack, to going, let's eat within a 12-hour period, to let's eat within an 8-hour period, to the latest I just saw was a 4 to 6 hour period. And from that first shift of intermittent fasting saying, hey, skip breakfast and have a later, have lunch and dinner. And I kept thinking, well, everything I've ever looked at says do this earlier. So I'm really fascinated by, of course, we want to look at food quality and we need to look at what we're eating. But I think, what this is really showing is when you eat matters. And I wonder if some of this is, how does this tie into all of this intermittent fasting, time restricted eating stuff? And what are the lessons that we can take? I know I'm throwing all this
Mhm.
stuff at you. What are the lessons that we can take from the fact that these fat cells do different things at different times, with how we should be tying that to when we should be eating?
Yeah, of course. And what we want to do with this information is just use it to maximize our metabolism because if we're kind of not synced up with what our fat cells are doing, according to the time that we're eating, which also affects them quite a bit, then we're not going to be, getting all the benefits that we're trying to get from the changes that we're making with the diet. So if you look at eating at night, your fat cells really aren't supposed to be storing and manufacturing at night. They're really more in a burning and also in a breaking down mode. So you're sort of losing that benefit that you're getting that normally happens at night, and that's really important for metabolism. You're interfering with that, and then in the daytime, in the daytime, really, we are supposed to be manufacturing, and the fat cells are really involved in a lot of different processes. So fasting in the morning can be okay, and certainly these fasting windows, are much better than eating continuously all the time. But shifting it more towards eating earlier in the day and stopping earlier in the evening is always going to work better with that clock in the fat cells because that clock depends more on time and not so much on eating or sleeping.
Yeah, that's, it's like that's what I'm noticing that seems to make the most sense. I think some takeaways here, and I'd love to just get your opinions on them. Number one, a takeaway of stopping eating earlier in the evening. From what you've seen, how many hours before bed? Because I just read the latest one that was saying, hey, ideally you'd be eating from 8 a.m. till 2 p.m. And I'm like, wow. But I also think, well, wouldn't it matter what time you really are going to bed and what time you are waking up? Because it's very different for someone waking up at 6 versus someone waking up at 7, very different for someone going to bed at 9 versus someone going to bed at 11. How many hours before bed would you think it's ideal to shut that kitchen down? Because I think that of anything we do is probably one of the most effective things that you could start with, is just to shut that kitchen down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I always tell people, 7 p.m. or 3 hours before bedtime is kind of, what to shoot for. If you can do a little bit longer than that, that's even better. So if you could stop eating by 6, that's even better. And the research shows us as well that the stuff that we eat at night is always going to be worse than the stuff that we eat in the morning. It's just sort of, the end of the day, we're all stressed and,
Right?
chocolate is like what
Yeah.
we want at night, right? So it's not only just the time and getting into that rest state, but also the types of choices that we make at night that are not the best.
Yes, we do tend to be much more virtuous in the morning. It's way easier. And it sounds like if you were gonna, so here's the other side of the coin. If you were gonna blow it, if you were going to go and say, and I'm not gonna even call it cheat, because to me, I look at it and I go, we should get like a B plus on our diet. You do not need to be perfect.
No, yeah.
But it is funny because when you look at like when people do tend to go sideways, they're not having birthday cake for breakfast, most likely,
No.
right?
Yep.
So if you were going to go sideways a bit, when would the best time to be?
Well, like what I always tell people is, if you're going to eat a little bit more, definitely having a good breakfast is very important. We're also not as hungry in the morning. So, if there's something that you're eating in the morning, you're really not going to overeat on it. I think the way I look at that is if it's something that you really enjoy and you're really moderating the amount, it could be okay to have that with your dinner, but then to cut it off after that, as long as everything your whole meal is really balanced and stable with respect to how it'll affect your blood sugar. So making sure it has lots of protein, lots of vegetables, which gives you fiber, lots of healthy fats. Those will definitely just stabilize your blood sugar. And then if you were to have a couple of squares of dark chocolate once in a while with the dinner is actually a good time to do that. Because you are going to be embarking on a fast after that, where you're not going to be eating for a little while. So it is actually, I always view that as okay to do. But, of course, if you're going to have a treat and you have it with your breakfast, you're much less likely to overeat on it just because of your natural appetite being low at that time.
So, last takeaway from like all this information, what are your recommendations now in terms of like, are you having people eat within an 8-hour window, a 12-hour window? Like what's your recommendation out there as a big insulin, the queen of really understanding how insulin demands are on the body and how best to regulate these things? What would you
Yeah,
tell?
so I work primarily with women who have hormonal issues, and so we always have to be like a little bit more gentle because sometimes, the these situations can become worse, from certain types of more strenuous fasting. But what I find for everyone is that a 12-hour window is, generally works for most people very, very well. And then, for people who've got a lot of weight loss resistance or insulin resistance, I'll often do, an 8-hour window for those patients with two meals. And I have also recommended, a single meal a day for certain patients who are, maybe really, really insulin resistant and struggling with type 2 diabetes. And that should always be medically supervised. But I've used a lot of different windows. And I think it really depends on your level of activity, your level of tolerance for fasting, how healthy you are in the first place, and how bad the insulin resistance is that you're trying to overcome. So, for somebody who's a pre diabetic, who's got a lot of insulin resistance, they actually sometimes need to move into more of these shorter windows of eating. And it just gives them so much more time without insulin playing a role. So, when you're not eating, your insulin will go down at that time. And that just helps people to become much more sensitive to insulin because there's less of it there all the time. So I have actually, tried a lot of these different windows. And I think the most important thing, though, is to just make sure there is a nice block of at least 12 hours where there is no eating happening. To allow all of these different functions in the body to work at the right time. It's almost like an interconnected system. And if you're eating during that time, you're almost messing with many different mechanisms of the body that are meant to sort of be in a fasting window as opposed to an eating window.
I love how you explain that, and I just, love that we are looking beyond just what you're eating as to when is a real powerful way to help with blood sugar and insulin. And I know you've got one other thing you're going to be giving everybody, and that's your food insulin demand list. And let's put this whole thing at jjvirgin.com/Dr. Fiona Clock, because I think we've done a Dr. Fiona, because you are a reoccurring guest of brilliance on the show. So we'll do Dr. Fiona Clock. Tell everyone about the food insulin demand list so that they will be able to get as their
Oh,
gift
thank
from
you,
you.
JJ. And I know that you're one of the pioneers in, understanding insulin resistance. And I remember following you like many years ago and watching what you were saying about this. So the food insulin demand is actually a metric kind of similar to the glycemic index, but it tells us how much our insulin goes up when we eat a food. For example, one food that's very spiking to our insulin is dairy protein. Even though it's low in the glycemic index, it causes our bodies to make a lot of insulin. And so many people react badly to dairy, either from sensitivities, but also because of the massive spike of insulin it causes. So this list goes through all of the most common foods that we would eat and gives you their food insulin demand number so that you can learn which of the foods might be really triggering your insulin to go higher than you're imagining.
Yeah, so key critical. It's, I think back to just the classic agave,
Yes.
right? And crystalline fructose that they'll put on a label and they'll go, low on the glycemic index. And it's just why we have to look beyond that, because you can still spike insulin and have something low on the glycemic index. So I think this is just brilliant. I'm excited everybody will grab this. I super appreciate it. And I appreciate your time today, Dr. Fiona. Thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you, JJ. It's been amazing to be here again.
So after the break, I'm going to give you your top takeaway from this episode. So stay with me. Welcome back. All right, this is the time when I do a debrief, give you an action item after what we've heard today. And so again, I'm setting this whole protocol out on a roadmap for how to just continue to up-level your health. And it starts with improving the quality of your food, then doing some detoxifying, then starting to figure out your food intolerances. But along the way, too, while we look a lot at focusing on what you're eating, I also want you to think about when you're eating. So if right now you haven't really been paying attention to that, step one is to get that kitchen closed at least 3 hours before bed. Now, this does not mean go to bed later. Okie dokie, deal? And to give yourself a solid 12-hour overnight fast. So if you stop eating at 7, then you do not eat breakfast before 7 in the morning. Kind of my rule of thumb now is to eat in the morning when you get hungry. So that might be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours after you wake up. And stop eating at least 3 hours before bed. Longer is better. And so that starts with doing a 12-hour fast. And then we just continue to look at if we can shrink that down to a 14-hour fast. And then maybe to a 16-hour fast. I tend to do those more on the weekends when we get up later, we can eat earlier. But again, a lot of great research coming out now on shortening that feeding window and doing time-restricted eating. All right. Just another little reminder, make sure you get the cool information from my buddy Dr. Fiona at jjvirgin.com/Dr. Fiona Clock. And if you haven't left a review yet, I would love, love, love to shout you out. So subscribe to JJ. That's where you go so you don't miss any of the episodes. And while you're there, leave a review and I will give you a shout out. All right. See you next time. Bye.